Welcome to the Creative Industry Insight podcast, a podcast that looks at various roles in the creative world. I'm your host, Bobby. Today's guest, production designer Donald Burt, joins us to talk about his work on Mank. Please be warned, there are heavy spoilers in this episode, so make yourself comfortable as we jump into the conversation with Donald. Hi, Donald. Thanks for joining me today.
Great to be here.
Feels like I can quote Mank by being like, "You're my great whale. I'm Captain Ahab. I finally caught you at a good time. We could get this done."
Well, I really appreciate you reaching out and taking an interest. That means a lot to me, more than you'll know.
Well, I think I have to thank Chris Crane and Dan Webster, Dan Webster, who pointed me in your direction because I couldn't actually get your contact details at first, and they passed it on to me, and they're like, "We can't do this." I think Dan said, like, it's best to get Donald on and speak to him about this, and Chris kindly passed me on your details. So this wouldn't have happened without those two. So I think,
great
props would go to them. But yeah, I guess we just have to jump straight into it. And I guess we start off with a nice, easy one. Is like, how did the project come about? Or was it a case of like David Fincher calling you up and just saying, "Saddle up, the next picture's been greenlit. Let's go"?
Actually, it wasn't that dramatic. We were working in 2019, 18 and 19. We were working on a feasibility study on a project. David, whenever he has a project, he usually brings me on for a few months to sort of sit down and figure it all out and figure out sort of what sets are going to be and what it might cost, just so that when we do go into production, we don't have to deal with all that stuff. We kind of have a toehold on it all. So we were working on this project for a few months, and it was January of 2019, and he and I were having coffee across the street from his office in a coffee shop. And we were conversing about the project that we were trying to put together and everything. And at some point toward the end of the conversation, he said, "Oh yeah, and then after this, there's this film that I want to do that I've been wanting to do for quite a while. And it's a little black and white period film. I'll get you a script and everything. And I want to do it. I want to do it real simple. I want it to be really well done. My father wrote it." I was kind of like, I got to deal with the horse that I'm saddled in right now. I can't really think about another project. So that was the first I heard about it. And then ironically, a few weeks later, that project that we had been trying to put together was put on hold, and his schedule became open, and the script landed on my email these days. I'll say desktop on my computer. And I read it, and we started to get together and talk about it, and sort of blocked out that period of time in later 2019 in which it was going to go into production. And that's how it kind of sort of came about. That was the genesis of it. This is a script, by the way, that he had, I don't know how many years. I know that he had tried to make it in the 90s, because when I first started on it, they brought in sort of the package of materials that they had gathered for it during its first life. And literally all that really was they had done some scouting in Los Angeles, and they had a box full of black and white photographs, old style, where they used to take the photos and paste them up in manila envelopes and do presentations that way. And so I kind of went through those, and I kind of looked at them mostly just to see what LA was like 25 years ago and how much it's changed. It's unbelievable. But that's sort of how it all began. I probably answered a little too much there. Sorry.
No. It's the great tidbits of information. Because it was written by his father, and I guess it has a more of a personal feel because you were working on like his dad's script. Mm-hmm. Did this sort of collaboration differ from previous films that you worked on together, or was it just the same?
Yeah, I mean, I knew it meant a lot to him, but it was never lorded over anybody. Like, this is so personal and special to me that I need extra or anything like that. It was always an approach of how I always go about David's films and about how he always works. It's about doing the right thing, making the right choices, working very hard. David works very hard. I work very hard. That's one of the things we have in common. We're the guys that come in at 6 a.m. and we're there at latest 6 a.m. for myself. It was the same approach. We want to do something so that we don't embarrass ourselves. We want to do something really good. We want it to be right. And we're going to have to fight to make it right. Not so much with production, but just in terms of the physicality of doing it. It was a tighter budget than most projects. And it was a shorter shooting schedule for David by far. Those were the challenges. Those were the physical challenges we had to face.
When I was doing my research, I think the budget was like 25 million or something like that. And
something like that, yeah.
When you're looking at other shoots that you guys worked on, you see the sort of how many days that you've worked on, and it's amazing, how different a shoot can be when you have less time to sort of shoot and how much you have to go through and everything. It's probably made easier that they shot on digital, because on film would really like hurt it a little bit.
Yeah. David did David was one of the first ones to kind of transfer to digital, make that segue when we did Zodiac. And he sat down with some people and they actually figured out sort of the amount of time that camera departments take to load and reload film on a set, and how much time he could save and actually put it into shooting, as opposed to watching these guys scramble to get the next can up. So that's kind of where that comes from. But, I think on Mank, because there were less shoot days and it was a tighter budget, I think that, David especially, and myself as well, we had to be really prepared. We had to have things all lined up so that when the filming day came, it wasn't like, okay, what are we going to do, or how are we going to do this, or whatever. And I actually production started at the end of August, and there was a 12-week production period that was budgeted for. I started 6 weeks before that with David, and we went scouting. We would sit and talk. We would go over everything. And I knew it was necessary and to get the film made. That's when the film was made, to be honest with you.
Because it's a period piece as well, and as you said before as well, LA's changed so much. Even in those 20 years that you've seen those earlier location scouts, that must be so hard to sort of find places and then know where you will need to do, what will need to be built, but then also going to certain areas where hopefully it hasn't been as touched as much by 21st century. So I guess problems like Starbucks or all these other chains that pop up randomly, and they would have never been there in the 30s.
Yeah. No, that was definitely something that we were rather daunting that we were facing. But, when we broke down the script and we really looked at it, and I always have this approach on things, keep it simple and build complexity within that. The locations were very simple. They were very defined. It wasn't, we didn't try to bite off more than we could chew in terms of showing LA in that period. We were very selective, and we kept within the margins. And I think that helped us a lot. We were able to find locations, and we were able to say, okay, within this studio lot, we can film this and we can film this area. And when we film in this area, we have to do some coverings of some things that are not period, but let's keep it contained to that. Let's not try to go, wandering around. Let's not try to show all the streets of Los Angeles, because we'll never be able to do that. Let's select a few buildings that we know are iconic for the period and show them in such a way that it makes the picture feel big and it makes it feel like we're there, and then move on.
Because if you think about it, there's not that many locations in mind when I think back now on the film, because you'd have the studio itself, the Hearst Castle, the ranch that Mank stays at, and then all these other sort of offices and random places.
And a few street scenes. Yeah.
I do have to admit, I think my favorite has to be the studio backlot. I think that's just where you just sort of feel like the magic of the movies are there. And it's just the same when you go to, it's probably changed quite a lot to modern day studios now because of security and everything. But when you do look at a set and you just think wow, this is what's been built. It's this is incredible.
Right.
And the craftsmanship that's got into everything. But what sort of research did you have to undertake for creating this sort of world? And is there when you're doing your research, was there anything specific that you wanted to sort of cherry pick to recreate? And what surprised you the most in your research?
The research, well, of course, you're just so reliant on research on a period project of this nature, and you start to categorize things. You look at the studios, just sort of as you were just saying, you look at the studios, you look at San Simeon, which was Hearst Castle, you look at Los Angeles in general, And then you look at the ranch, and we were just gifted by the grace of God. The ranch still exists and is almost intact as it was, believe it or not. The exterior, that is, aside from removing air conditioners and electrical conduit and putting in a new patio. We were very fortunate with that. But in terms of the research, you can obviously source a lot online. I think the best research came out of the Academy in their library. And they not only had wonderful photo images of the period and especially of the studios, but they also had real documents that were written between Mankiewicz and studio heads and so forth. And you got to see the signatures, and you got to see the banter that went back and forth. And I think what surprised me most in going through these stacks of correspondences between, Mankiewicz and the studio executives, or studio executive and a rival studio executive, is just quite honestly, the amount of attention they paid to gambling and paying off debts. It was unbelievable. I mean, there would be a typewritten letter from the head of Warner Brothers to the head of Ince Studios before it became MGM saying, "Dear Harold, I hope this finds you well today. Just to remind you, the payment of $1,200 from the bet on the USC Stanford game is now due, and I'd love to have that money and see it soon," and blah, 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 and you just go, and it's so formally typed, and there were just stacks of these, and that kind of surprised me. I mean, I knew that went on, but not to that extent. I think the best thing that came out of the research, though, was a finding of some black and white photos from the period of Hearst Castle, which in the day was called San Simeon. And we actually found some night photographs that were very simple, and they really were a gift, because they sort of set the template for how we were going to deal with the exterior of San Simeon. And they were done in black and white. They were beautiful photographs. And, they showed the lighting. They showed Marion Davies in a lot of them. They were almost like these sort of glamour photos that they could take in the 30s as best they could. And those were really helpful. That was like a treasure. And the interior as well, the black and white photos of the interior. So, in terms of San Simeon, when I saw those, I was like, I don't want to go there. I want to work off this. I want to be in this black and white period world. There's an aura to those reference material that you just can't get now when you go there. So, that was really interesting to find that. I think in reading all the books, the biographies and autobiographies that I collected of either Mankiewicz or, actually Marion Davies was quite enlightening. Her book referenced the parties at San Simeon and how they would get the actors to go up there, and you'd be invited by William Randolph Hearst, and he would leave tickets for you at the train station, and you'd be expected to come. And it was first scripted to be the classic train station in Los Angeles, which is Union Station downtown. But irony of an ironies, it wasn't even built then. And I think that was sort of a convenience in the scripting. But in her book, she revealed that they used the Glendale train station, which is Glendale's sort of I don't know, what would you call it? It's not a suburb. It's a portion of Los Angeles. It has its own, its own city and its own mayor and so forth. But it is part of Los Angeles, and it was settled in the early days. And they have this small train station that is done actually architecturally in the Spanish colonial revival style. And it's tucked away, and it still functions. It's tucked away on this little side street. And quite honestly, I had never seen it. I was embarrassed. I'd never seen it in all my time I've lived in LA, and I've lived here for 40 plus years. And it was, it was one of those surprises where you go, this is perfect. We can do the drive up here where he gets on the train. We can do it all. We have to do some, some matte paintings in the background, but oh my goodness, what a great location, just because it is kind of unknown and it is a surprise. So that was kind of interesting.
Those sort of places are always like that in your towns, though. If you live in a certain place for many years, because you walk past it, you're so used to seeing it that you just don't realize what it is. I might as well share some embarrassment as well. Like, I live near Windsor Castle, and I've never been inside. It's one of those. It's just one of those things.
Well, I'm one up on you. I've been inside of it, so there you go.
Well, I've been into the Glendale train station. but yeah, it's just that sort of like, I can imagine the research part being quite fun because there's so much with LA being so different. But then there's also such a time that like the 30s would have been such an interesting time because you would have had like the end of the Roaring Twenties, and then you would have the Great Depression.
It was blossoming. It was all blossoming out here. It was crazy. It was like, money meets the Wild West kind of, and and to read the history of the film studios and the people involved in the studios and their lifestyles and it truly was the golden age. And we scouted Douglas Fairbanks, the first home he built in the hills of Beverly Hills. And, now, of course, it's got other houses clustered nearby it. But this beautiful house that was built in the 20s, the craftsmanship of it. And you realize when you look at the research of it being built, it was out in the middle of nowhere. It was in the hills all by itself. You realize how the city has evolved that way. But in those days, it was really the Xanadu of the world.
You do feel being transformed into that world. And I guess as well, like with the film being like jumping time differences, did that affect the way that you designed the film?
No, not really. No, that has to do with the editing. I think that's where editing adds to design, but design doesn't really. They come in, they shoot, and then they time jump it and per the script. The only thing it really does is if there's a time change within a space and we have to move around some set dressing to show the passage of time, or there are more cigarettes butts in the ashtray, or whatever, that kind of thing. But in terms of the broad design, what the film is, what the sets are, not really. It's more the details.
Okay, because I thought if you were going through the sort of 30s, I thought there'd be a bit more significant change in how things looked, but it sounds like there wasn't that much, which is, I guess that makes things easier.
It doesn't. We didn't, there's not you go through, I think, any decade and things change, but a lot of the things that change aren't necessarily in spaces where you live, I don't think. And you realize that when you're in an era, there's always a lot left over from the era before it. For instance, the typewriters were from the 30s, but they were also from the 20s, things like that. You go into the writers' rooms, the chairs, the tables could have been from the late 20s. So who knows? We all live in that kind of, we think we live in current day, but when you really start to look around your room, as I sit here in my office, I'm looking at bookshelves that I bought 2005. It's kind of how life plays out.
Cool. I thought there would be like more design problems coming to that, but it sounds like doesn't sound like
I think that
many, which is good.
The broad design problem was just finding things and getting things that were period correct, and especially when it came to the technical, the film equipment, the cameras. When we were shooting the scene of Marion Davies on the pyre, that was a struggle trying to get that equipment and so forth. And we just barely made it, to be honest with you, with what we had. I think if there would have been another, off to the side, I want to see another scene where they're shooting something else, I don't know if I could have provided the period correct material for that. That was difficult.
Yeah, because in those scenes as well, you notice all the lights that they put up when they go to Mr. Metcalf, who's on the B camera. That's probably like a specialist. All the track that they must have had. The crane, I think there's a crane in there as well.
There's a crane there that we found that was period. All those elements we found were period. And we actually built the lights. We found the shells of them, and then we took them to Warner Brothers or Universal, I can't remember which, lighting department, and we had them build the interior guts of them to be period correct. So it was an exercise.
But where would some of this old film equipment, would this just be in prop houses, or would it be or like you'd have to go to sort of like sales or some sort?
Yeah, no, well, a little bit of both. Obviously everybody hits the internet these days, and you can search countrywide for things. And there is a prop house here called History for Hire, which has an abundance of things, but not necessarily from our period. Much of what they have kind of, starts in the 40s and moves upward, but they did have things from the 30s, and we were able to take those and use them. They had the crane, they had the camera, they had the microphone boom and the microphone. So, we became quite close friends with them. And, the other challenge was they have this in stock, and because it's so old, it's a little beat up and dinged. And, you have to walk that fine line between it would have been new in the period or newer, and how far do you go in reclaiming its old look and its old value without alienating the audience, which always feels like anything from the 20s should look old and beat up. There's this kind of mindset with audiences about period films, I think, that, for instance, I was talking with Roger Deakins a few weeks ago about shooting period films where you do a street and you do signage. And the expectation is from everybody that if it's a 1920 film and you have signs on storefronts, they should all be old and weathered and aged down and, peeling paint. And the truth of the matter is there was a day when those were just brand new and they were fresh and crisp and clean. So, there's that fine line between balancing act, where do you break that? Where do you break that and make it work?
That's a really good point that you made up, is that in my mind, if somebody said this is a 20s film and then they showed you certain equipment, it should be dusty, old, slightly decrepit. But as you said, no, at one point, this was probably fresh, brand new the day before, a couple of days before, or a week before, which is, again, is just another detail that needs to be looked into. When these are the sort of details that need to be looked into when you're designing, I guess, as well.
Oh, absolutely.
To make things as authentic as possible. Again, like usually production designer plays a big part in the color palette of the film, but of course this film is in black and white. So would that make it easier for you, or did it make it harder because there'll be certain colors you couldn't use because they would just not translate in black and white?
That's a good question, actually. I don't think it made it easier or harder. I think it just made it different. We did a lot of testing early on. I think the seminal moment was when David just came in and said, you know what, let's just start photographing everything in the noir filter in our cameras. And then we'll use that as our standard. And once it all became standardized, it got easier. No, it didn't get easier. It became an easier method. Let's say that. I'm not sure it became easier because there was still a lot of testing and a lot of value alterations that had to be done to certain colors. I mean, we were finding early on that certain colors absolutely look beautiful in black and white, sort of oranges, pinks, greens. There's some depth to them that you just didn't get out of certain gray tones. So the challenge was for me to find neutrals, quite honestly, to find colors that the sets would be in real life, so that when the actors came into them, they didn't feel like they were in some sort of funhouse. They didn't, I can't paint the bungalow pink because it looks good in black and white and have them come in and do these emotional scenes. It just wouldn't be right. So, that was a bit of a struggle, but it's like once we keyed in on some certain colors and some certain glazes, and we created our own template for what we could use. And that sort of became our logic board that we would go to and say, okay, let's use HC 184 or whatever. And that was within our language. And, it just became a challenge of like trying to make sure things looked real, not accepting them. When we went out and shot on the streets in Los Angeles, buildings and so forth, we couldn't do anything to them. So we kind of approached it a little bit like, let's make it look the way it should, and then photograph it in black and white. And if we need to alter it a little bit by taking it darker or lighter, we'll do that. But let's make it the way it should be with the soundstage sets. And I think that worked out really well. The best thing was that it's sort of at least about a third of the way through production with myself, because I was using that filter on everything, the black and white world became very intuitive. It became part of you. You could look at things and easily tell, it's not worth photographing that couch because that's not going to look good, or it's not, this whole wall is too dark, it's going to need to be lightened up or whatever. You started from doing the exercise, you started to understand and be able to just intuitively realize what would work and what wouldn't work. And I think that was a great place when I sort of realized that my set decorator and my art directors and my prop people all had reached that point of being able to say, this table comes in this, but I don't think it's going to work without having to go through the whole exercise. Making the black and white, the important thing about black and white was to be able to get to that point where artistically and aesthetically, it was second nature to you when you walked in this world of color. It's kind of like transforming yourself from chroma to value, being value oriented.
It must have been so difficult to sort of the trial and error of colors at first, because I think I read somewhere red, it came out really badly in black and white.
Black goes black.
Oh, okay. And
I can very quickly it goes black. Yeah.
So I can imagine a lot of stuff like red was kind of cut out, but even though it sounds like the process of looking for the correct things, like how people had to come out of like this colorful world to like monochrome to be like, okay, this is what we'd go for. This is what we would look good, and basically training people into that second nature. But it's even more amazing to hear that we use an iPhone filter to sort of test things out and see what worked and what didn't work.
Because it's so immediate, it's just like everybody carries around their iPhone, and it's getting so that so many people on the crew in the art department just take pictures with their iPhones. They don't even bother with cameras. I still do some camera work myself, but I have filters on my camera too. But the iPhone is so immediate, especially when you're going to a vendor and you just need to take a quick picture. And that was what we had everybody set it to.
No, that's very
and it worked out really well.
Yeah, just the power of that little piece of technology in your pocket.
Oh my goodness.
with helping you guys out in everything. I want to go back to a point that you mentioned earlier, because when you were doing your research, you had photos of the William Hearst Castle and how you basically kind of were more faithful in looking at the photos rather than visiting the place, which I can imagine if you went to visit would kind of taint your ideas a little bit. And I can imagine it's been slightly remodeled since the 30s. And it is like those scenes, the castle itself is very decadent, luxurious, basic, in just, they look incredible. How faithful did you want to keep it to looking like those photos? And or did you want to have a little bit more creative freedom to sort of spruce it up and be like, well, let's add this, maybe this painting here, or this sort of maybe, object here, and maybe something that you might put in your house rather than William Hearst.
Right. I think, this is where the production side of it comes in a bit, because we were challenged budgetarily. And for those sets, actually the birthday party for Mayor and the dining scene, the dining party at the end of the film, are the same set. We just transformed them. We built basically a rectilinear shell that was long and narrow, that we had elements such as fireplaces, wood paneling, windows. For one scene, we had columns, we had windows, and we had a fireplace on the side of the wall, and we shot it that way. And then we removed the fireplace, we removed the columns, we added more sort of Gothic tracery pass-throughs, we added ironwork, we rearranged the fireplaces and brought in different fire. We just sort of used that as sort of a Lego set in a way, just because financially we had to make it work. And then we added the giant hallway on at the end for the dining room scene. But in terms of having to emulate San Simeon, and I use that word because I think it was more about emulating it for our narrative than it was replicating it for documentary purposes. And we looked at the research, and there were certain elements that we knew made it feel like it was San Simeon. There was the limestone floor, there was the wood paneling, there were the tapestries, there were the large fireplaces, there was the long table for dining. And then there were the architectural details, as I said, of sort of this collision of classicism and Gothic and Spanish revival that came together. And we just sort of took that and said, okay, how do we bring this into our set to serve our purposes and do it within our budget? Because we certainly can't. One of the reasons I didn't go there was that I knew it was so detailed and I knew it was so indulgent that I probably would have been depressed looking at it, thinking, how in the world, I this cannot be the bar that I have to reach. I'm telling a different story. I have to deal with my narrative. And my story is that he lives in this opulent space and he has all these antiquities from Europe, whether they be old Flemish tapestries or Renaissance paintings or what have you. And, that became sort of the driving point. And there were certain things that we configured the way they have it configured, but we didn't replicate. For instance, when he built that dining hall, he went to Spain, and William Hearst was a huge collector from Europe. And he would collect all these artifacts and have them shipped over and just put into his space. And in Spain, he actually bought a monastery, a Spanish monastery, and had it disassembled, shipped it back, and rebuilt it within the dining hall. The walls are all clad with the wood paneling from this monastery from the 11th century or something. And there's no way I was going to be able to pull something off like that. So I had to simplify it and try to evoke the same feeling by being smart and using materials, having an outline that served us both for the narrative and for the budget and aesthetically. So that's really what it became. So, for instance, the exterior of San Simeon, we had the same issues. They have all these different tiered, hardscaped places at Hearst Castle where they have pools and they have statuary and they have gardens and so forth. And we literally went to Huntington Gardens, which is part of Pasadena, actually, in California, which is one of the nicer gardens. And we just brought in simple walls with ironwork, and we brought in some of the at Hearst Castle, they have these sculpted globe lights. We brought those in and we shot in 3 or 4 different places. We brought in some balustrade and some stone benches. And we thought, okay, if we use these elements in these 3 or 4 places at this park, at this garden, it will help tie it all together. And these are the 3 or 4 things, element-wise, that we kept noticing at San Simeon in the photos from the period, or Hearst Castle, I should say, in the photos from the period. So we just sort of picked and chose those elements. We knew they were simple. We kept it simple and we made it work,
I'm just slightly taken aback by the whole sort of transporting monastery from Europe to San Simeon. And just that whole idea is just crazy. I can't believe somebody actually did that.
In the 30s.
Yeah, there's even I can't get my head around the whole idea of doing that.
I know. It's insane. They had photos of them unpacking crates at this property, of this stuff, and it's like, it was interesting to read because in another sense, it's like somebody with so much money, they don't know what to do with it.
I'm just picturing like a scenario that they bring all of this stuff over and then it's just like, yeah, sorry, boss, it's not going to fit, or we don't have enough materials to fill out the whole place. Might need to buy another monastery or something of similar ilk. But I guess the sort of the opposite of San Simeon would be the ranch that Mank writes in, because it's very, very bare, very sort of sad place in terms of just very stripped back, and you could tell that there's a reason why he's been brought there and everything. But for those sort of locations that you sort of design for, how do you want to make that sort of place more visually interesting?
Well, I think for the interior set, which was what we built on stage, the exteriors we actually shot at the location. It was adding depth to it, giving it here we have scenes throughout the movie. And I sort of call it the womb of the movie because we kept coming back to it, where this main character is in bed 98% of the time. And, shooting a guy in a bed couldn't be more boring than, and how do you not make it boring? So, I think one of the things you do is you put depth around it. And David initially had the idea that maybe it's not in a bedroom, maybe it gets moved into a common area. So we created this living room based on what we scouted. We sort of saw elements again. We harvested from the interior elements that we saw, and we had hallways, we had a kitchen, we had a little dining area, we had, just layers and depth, so that when you shot around him, there was something more to it than just being in a box. Truth of the matter is he was probably in a box, but, just trying to give it a little more sort of deserted romance kind of.
let's be honest, bedrooms aren't that particularly interesting. You can litter it with things and to show sort of people's characters, but I think when you notice in David Fincher's films, and even some of the films that you've designed for him as well, is that they shoot it in a particular way that it doesn't look boring. So if for example, like Social Network, that whole sort of first opening when after Zuckerberg is dumped and they're in the bedroom making face smash and everything. There's a way that it sort of like keeps it compelling and interesting. And then there's kind of small gags as well in the film, in Mank, like when he gets the alcohol shipped to him.
Oh, right. Yeah.
You know, those sort of things as well make, and the callbacks later on when they were like, oh yeah, must have been the new pull-up that helped me out and everything.
Right. The steno pads, I like the little steno pads and the way they were used, you know, to show the passage of time. I mean, David's never going to shoot anything, you know, he's a visual genius. He's never going to shoot anything boring. And I didn't mean to imply that he would, but, you know, just in terms of design, offering opportunities to give things, you know, it was the same thing in Social Network with the dormitory, you know, the dormitory room for the guys, you know, giving layers and depth so that it doesn't become what they really had at Harvard, which is really boring. Trust me.
I think I've seen something similar because I think one of my friends went to one of those sort of prestigious schools and he was in the dorms and it's just a room.
Yeah, exactly.
With the paint falling off as well. It's just like, wow, such a nice place, you know, such a nice place on the outside, go inside. Wolf. I was watching a video whilst doing my research and there's a lot of VFX sort of, was it like matte paintings inserted in. And I actually, when you're watching it, it's very seamless and it's amazing how much has been put in. As an audience, you don't really realize. But when you're designing and coming up with ideas, does the VFX play a part in how you're designing everything? Or is that a conversation that other departments have to sort out later on when they're filming?
So it does play a part in the sense that, okay, for instance, the monkey cages that they walk by, we built the wall with the ironwork that they walk by, and we illustrated a monkey cage to go behind it for that very purpose. We try to illustrate for any potential visual effects, extensions or matte paintings that quite possibly have to occur. And some of them we don't know about until after the movie. And then David looks at it and, you know, says, I want to do this, I want to do that, which quite often happens and is the prerogative of any director, I think. But, you know, we try to at least assemble something so they know the language with which they're dealing. Now, the monkey cage that we illustrated, they took it and they pushed it a step farther, which is what they should do. I mean, they're creative geniuses, and it's wonderful that they do that. But it was all within the language of what we sort of put down and used as a foundation. And I kind of forget some of the other ones that we did, but you know, that's kind of how we approach it in terms of don't worry about that wall that's going to get painted, that's going to have windows painted in it or whatever. And we draw it up as best we can. And if it gets close in the end, that's great. And if it becomes something entirely different, you know, these people are artists and they're allowed to bring something to the project. But I think what they do is they look at the overall, we provide the research for them. We provide the architectural research for them. And they look at the overall design of the film and they do something that's complementary to it, as opposed to like, here's our opportunity to have a spaceship that nobody's seen before kind of thing. You know, David doesn't just shoot the guys on a little corner piece of set against green and then they invent it later. You know, he doesn't do that too much.
Yeah, because I guess with VFX, you can literally, possibilities are endless with what you want to create. And I think one of the coolest sort of matte painting VFX shots is when Mank and Miriam are by the fountain. And what, you know, the background's all sort of just like painted in and everything. And I honestly didn't realize that was a VFX, and it looks incredible. And even the water that splash up is a VFX as well. Because I know some people were kind of just like, I mean, why would you VFX that in? And I guess it's just because you can control it, manipulate where you would like the water to go, and
it's easier to do.
How it would actually look rather than on camera. There's something as well that you mentioned earlier about when you're getting this sort of camera equipment, and that was the hardest part to do. When collaborating with set deck, and especially the set decorator, Jan Pascal, like what issues would come up when you're putting the sets together? Because I can imagine, other than the camera stuff, like I can imagine stuff like if you had to have change hinges or put like door handles in, like I can imagine some of that stuff is very hard to get in large quantities, or sometimes it's not really up to scratch to sort of look in like it's in good nick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's there's a lot of replicated hardware that exists, and we relied on that quite a bit. But funny, living in LA, you do have like Warner Brothers Studios, you have Universal Studios. They have a stock of hardware that's old and period. The hardware was the least of the issues. I mean, it's funny because Warner Brothers Studio actually still has in their prop department the original desk from the 1920s that the head of Warner Brothers Studio sat behind. And it's, you look at it and you go, really, this was the desk? I mean, it's like 5 feet wide, but, they keep they keep a lot of artifacts like that. I think the biggest challenge was just with set decorating was just having a quantity of things. You could get 1 or 2 telephones that matched, but you couldn't get 4. You could get 5 or 6 typewriters that matched, but you couldn't get 12, that kind of thing. And that's always kind of a challenge. And I think that was the hardest thing for them. But, furniture, dressing furniture, all that it's a search to find the right pieces for the character, but it exists. So that was good. I mean, you're in London, they've got furniture in London from the 10th century.
The prop houses in London and the surrounding areas are crazy. On the outside, they look quite boring to the normal person. It just looks like one big warehouse. Right. But when you step inside, you're just like, I can't believe you've got this or you've got that, or this random sort of lamppost that I just had no idea how you store it. It's basically like a hoarder's paradise. It's probably the best way to describe it.
Yeah, it is.
And I'm always blown away by those places and costume places as well, where you just they literally have everything, and it just just amazing.
Yeah.
Until somebody actually accidentally breaks something, then it's not
good. Well, the thing about London is you have things from the medieval period, which is just mind blowing. We didn't have a medieval period.
Again, like those prop houses, when they do have stuff that's really, really old, you're too scared to sort of handle it or take it because it's just like, wow, you have to be really delicate. What was like your favorite set to design and to like bring to life? And then when you actually walk on set being like, wow, like you did it. This is like, this looks incredible.
I get asked that, and I can't really, it's really hard to pick one over the other because, they're different and yet they're the same, and they're all part of the bigger, larger story. And even to me, some of the simple little sets that are just, these kind of configured walls for certain shots, like the hospital set when he's laying in bed and you see Orson out of focus coming down the hallway and it's sort of dreamlike. That was a little fractured set that we put together and it worked so well, and kind of go, wow, we didn't have much money and we faced that challenge and we got it done and it looked good and it worked. And that there's as much value in that as there is in pulling off the interior of Hearst Castle and the interior of the ranch. So it's kind of hard for me to say one was more rewarding than another because I put equal importance on everything.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I think it's like naming your favorite child. You can't do
exactly.
it. But secretly you do. In that deep down, you'll have like, there'll be some days you would like this, some days you like something else. I do love the whole look and feel of the film.
Thank you.
When you're
Thank
when you're just taken into that world, and it does. Cause I haven't watched many films from that period. Maybe I should do to get more of a feel and understanding of everything. But I think sometimes we miss those type of films and that sort of period.
Yes.
And it's just, I guess the best word is just pleasant. It's when you're in that sort of world, it's just something completely different. And as well, like there's not much technology there as well in terms of like, there's no iPhones, there's no people with their Bluetooth speakers and everything.
Right.
And you do feel like you're in a time where it's just like, wow, life was just so different.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no cutaway to the computer screen. There's no There's no researching. There's no going into somebody's house and looking on the computer and reading the script that got emailed to so and so. There's none of that. It's a different world. It's an analog existence, and there's something refreshing about that. Something very refreshing about that.
And even those, when you're saying about the notes and the letter when the new writer Charlie steps onto when he gets introduced, I think it's just those little details as well just really kind of not make the film, but makes it even more authentic and enjoyable.
Right.
You know, like in a weird way, like personable, because it's like you're getting summoned by the boss sort of thing to come and work for him.
Yeah, and I think each period of time, you know, and especially in art as we know it, you know, it has its commodities, inventions that are utilized and they're felt to be, and they were looked upon in that period as being the advanced, you know, the way we look at a computer now, or we look at an iPad, or we look at an iPhone or a Samsung Galaxy. They, in the day when I was going through the research and looking at all these letters from correspondences from one studio head to another to somebody else, the way they were all typed and so formally typed. And I realized, you know, the typewriter was the invention of the day. It was the one that was utilized like we utilize email. And I can just see it like, oh, I'll have it typed up for you. I'll get that typed up, or this letter is important, we should type it. That was the way it was done. It's quite interesting. I'm sure they kind of looked upon the typewriter the way we look upon our MacBooks.
Also, the attention to detail of your writing, that you have to get it correct, because there's no backspace. Once the ink is on the page, that's it. It's done. No going back on that one.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. It has to be thought out.
How are you finding the response to the film and all the award recognition that you're garnering from it? Because I think at the time of this recording, you've been nominated for BAFTA and Art Directors Guild Award. And I think you won Satellite Award, just to name a few.
Yeah. I mean, I don't make movies for awards. I'm kind of, not that I don't like to talk about it, but I find that I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for the recognition. I'm actually very thankful for that. But at the same time, I feel like it's about the film, and it always is with me. It's like I want to work on a film that in 20 years they pick it up and they don't go, oh, this won Best Art Direction. No, I don't want that. I want them to pick it up and watch it and go, that's a meaningful film, and it's meaningful because this is my takeaway from it, and it touched my heart in some way, or it touched me, or it made me question something. That's what I think is important in terms of my contribution, and that's what I want to be a part of. The other is great and wonderful, but it's not what. It doesn't drive me. It doesn't drive me. Yeah, I like to be modest.
It's a team effort as well. You know, it's one needs to work for the other work needs to work for that. And as you said, like if you're making films, you want to have that impact on people. As you said, they don't pick up to be like, oh, I want this award. It's more like, no, this film spoke to me because it hit me at a certain time where you're like, wow, like this is the sort of films that I want to make or inspire people.
You know, the thing about filmmaking is it's very collaborative. I work for the director. I don't even want to be seen on set. I don't even care if they walk in on a set and look at it and go, oh, this is wonderful. Where's the designer? I don't even want to be around. It's like, it should be wonderful. That's the way I look at my work. And I want them to come in and use the set and have it be part of the story and be an element that helps make the story and helps pull together those findings that people have when they watch the film, and it makes them ponder. That's what I want to be a part of. I want to be a contributor to that. And that's what I see my existence as in my role. I don't see it as like, I don't take films because it's going to have a great set in it. Oh, I want to do this movie because it's going to have a great spaceship or whatever. I don't know, whatever. That's not the reason for me to take a film. The reason for me to take a film is, does it speak to me? Do I trust the people that are working on it? And does it speak to me?
Do you want to sort of follow up on that? It's like, what do you mean by speak to you? And how did Mank speak to you in wanting to do the film?
Speak to you in the sense of when you read the script the first time, what does this mean to me? You know, does this have something that I feel, whether it be characters have redemption, characters have forgiveness? Is it about sometimes it's not even about the big issue or the script. Sometimes it's about, I like this script because, there's something in the side of it where I feel like somebody's searching and they can't find, but they're an important soul to the script, something like that. And I think that's important to me. Like, what is the purposefulness of this script? And then beyond that, what is the secondary issue that I feel is important in terms of telling this story? So that's kind of how I approach scripts and so forth, only because I also sit there and think, can I spend 6 to 9 months working on this project, knowing that probably every week I'm going to read this script 3 or 4 times? Am I going to be able to do that? And I've certainly had a lot of scripts where it's been sold to me by my agent. The script is getting there, but really great sets, da 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 da. And I read it and I'm just like, I can't relate to this. Yeah, you're right, great sets. But, there are great sets everywhere. Who are we kidding? In terms of Mank, I think Mank spoke to me in the sense that, the side story that I liked in Mank was about Upton Sinclair and about how many people in that period in America were struggling, and how there was this voice that rooted for the underdog, but they didn't realize it. And somehow that spoke to me. I like projects that have people that are in the margins. I like projects that have people that defend people in the margins. I think Mank in his own way was doing that. I think Mank had a lot of people in there that were searching. I think Marion Davies was searching. And this is all my take on it, by the way. And everybody has their different take on a film. And a good film, people will all have different takes. But I enjoyed that part of it. I enjoyed are these people really happy? Are they really content? It's something that I kind of look at with my own life. And that's what's great about a film like that to me, is like, yes, it's the story of writing Citizen Kane, but it's also the story about so many other things. It's like, I always tell people Zodiac to me was, it's the story about trying to find the Zodiac killer, but it's also the story about 2 men who have this obsession, and they express it in different ways, and it takes them on different ventures, and how obsession can be something that can either control your life and ruin it, or you can notice it and keep it harnessed.
Because I guess what took me aback a little bit from Mank, brought it up, is like the happiness of people, but like the politics of everything.
Yeah.
I guess in my mind, I thought, as you said, it'd be about the writing of Citizen Kane and the whole sort of process of that. But it does explore a lot of people's happiness, what people are doing, the sort of, not necessarily underbelly, but the sort of the stuff that people do to sort of keep their like businesses afloat or to keep themselves going. So you would have, what's his name, the CC, the guy who borrows $1 off
right
via the what's it called,
the
security guard.
Yeah.
And the things that he would do to just to stay afloat for his family by wearing the billboard, or
right
the when you find out the revelation that William Hurst is paying 50% for Mank's salary just to sort of keep him around for his he's saying. And that's like another thing that explores is like the human side of people. And what like people are going through. And even I think you see like Mank, the change of Mank's character, the way he sort of talks to his assistant played by Lily Collins when she gets the letter, and he's kind of mocks about her husband saying, oh yeah, the bombers and stuff, and actually he's missing. And those are the sort of things that kind of surprised me about the film and want me to sort of revisit now this information to sort of understand it and gauge it more.
Right. No, I think you're right. Absolutely right. And that's what I like about it. We weren't trying to we didn't look at Citizen Kane and say, okay, let's make our movie be like this. Let's have it look like this. Citizen Kane is a narrative relationship to the film. We put in some things that they did in Citizen Kane. We did the hallway of mirrors. And if it shows, it shows. If it doesn't, it doesn't. That was kind of an attitude we had. And it was a separate story than Citizen Kane. It was a different story. There are parallels. There are places where it touches, but it wasn't a mirror of it.
So I guess this leaves my final question. What's next for you?
Oh, I don't know. I have a commercial I'm doing in a week and a half, so that's what's next. I'm on that, and beyond that, I have no idea, and that's kind of nice, actually.
That's probably sure. That was a really nice and simple answer. Perfect. It's a nice bookend.
Yeah. So after I finish with you, I'm going to get back to drawing for it and get that completed and work on a commercial for 2 weeks. So that's where my mind is. Whenever I get on a project, I'm on it. So,
yeah, full steam ahead. Don, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you again. I really appreciate you taking the time out to speak to me about Mank, which is streaming now on Netflix for anybody who hasn't seen it. But also, probably spoiler alert that if you've listened to all of this without watching it,
there's a lot of giveaway.
Exactly. Again, thank you, Don. Take care.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
It's all you. So take care. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.